Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Excited to be talking with you today. A few weeks ago, I kind of started this study with a video called CERN Attempts to Contact Apollyon's Locusts. And on the thumbnail, it says, "Is CERN breaching the abyss?" And I talked a little bit about what that means, what the locusts are, and how they might potentially be extra dimensional, which I believe they are. I believe angels are inhabiting extra dimensions above our three of space and one of time that we have access to. And I'll talk about that. I'll do some review in that. And then I also recently did a video called Shapeshifting Nephilim Skinwalkers and Angelic Genetics. That was the Sharpening Report episode 344. And on the thumbnail it says, "Everything supernatural explained by this one aspect of higher reality." And in that one, I got more into the extra dimensional characteristics of the fallen angels and how that aspect of them, when they mated with women, which we read about, with human women, which we read about in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, and also the book of Enoch, why that meant they became giants. And in that video, I said that I have an entire study on the cherubim from Ezekiel. These are the good guys. And also in one of those videos, I talked about, I believe it was the CERN one, I talked about how when you look at the locusts of Revelation 9, you see direct inverse parallels to descriptions from the Ezekiel angels. So don't worry if you didn't see those two episodes already, those two videos. You don't need to see them to understand this one. Because these are three different aspects of kind of the same thing, or at least the same broad topic. But this can be, this absolutely can be just a standalone video. But in that video, I asked, if people wanted to see a video on the cherubim from Ezekiel to let me know, and I'd be happy to do a video about their extra dimensional nature and really dig into the scriptures and pull out descriptions that Ezekiel is giving 2,600 years ago. And he's actually describing some things that have only in the last few years been talked about in quantum physics. And an overwhelming amount of people said, yes, we would love to see that video. So that's what this video is. And so I'm excited to dig in. Before we get started, if you are viewing this on YouTube or Rumble, please hit the subscribe button. I think it's follow on Rumble, but if you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and please click the bell to turn on all notifications so you'll know when I upload a new video, which I do fairly frequently. Also, if you want full videos, we can't post full videos of everything that we do at Daily Renegade because of censorship issues with YouTube. So we created dailyrenegade.com. And that's where you can get full videos and you get early access. So if you're watching this right now on YouTube, it's probably, let's see what that would be, Friday. Well, I don't have a calendar on me right now, so I probably should have gotten this ready before the stream. You're probably watching this, what would that be, April 3rd maybe? So no, it would be May 3rd. May 3rd, excuse me. So I'm recording this 2 weeks before that and putting it up on the website. So if you're a member, you get the full video, but you also get early access. You get it 2 weeks in advance. So that website is dailyrenegade.com. Go become a member today. Join the family. We'd love to have you, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So let's jump into it and just talk about what the strangest angels in the Bible are. And you can sort of describe these as like quantum angels from beyond hyperspace. So and we get this from the first chapter of the book of Ezekiel, and it's really mind-bending. By the way, the research for this video you can find in two of my books, Cherubim Chariots and Quantum Creation, which you can find at prophecywatchers.com. So head on over to prophecywatchers.com. Both of those are available in a special package. Get those books there. Don't get them on Amazon. Why support probably the biggest company in the world, the most rich company in the world, when you can support a really excellent prophecy ministry. Okay. Now, throughout the entirety of the book of Ezekiel, the overall meanings and purposes of the visions are explained. But there's many specific aspects that are not fully explained. So in the past, many people have offered their own ideas and conclusions, and I have found a possible explanation for certain components of Ezekiel's vision involving a quantum physics concept that I've talked about before, and that is called extra-dimensional unfolding. So extra-dimensional unfolding, it's relatively a new thing, and I'll explain what all that means. But again, also I should mention, if you're viewing this on the website at dailyrenegade.com, if you're a member, I have show notes available that you can download right on the video page. You'll see a little link for a PDF. Download those show notes and you can follow along with me. I got all my research in there. So there have been a lot of ways to begin on how to delve into Ezekiel's vision. And probably the best is just to examine the vision in sections and look at each one independently. So we're going to begin in Ezekiel 1, verse 4. And it says, "And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud and a fire enfolding itself, and a brightness was about it. And out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire." And again, that is Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4. Now, another biblical connection to this idea of a whirlwind taking an individual out of known reality is the description of Elijah being taken up in a whirlwind that we get in 2 Kings 2:11. And I do have a entire video on Elijah and the rapture and all that too. And I also wrote an article for Prophecy Watcher magazine, The Prophecy Watcher, on that same subject. So again, prophecywatchers.com. Now, I find this to be especially intriguing when considering that Ezekiel describes something from outside our three spatial dimensional reality coming through and out of the whirlwind. Ezekiel 1:5 says, "Also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of four living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man." So this tells us that four beings came out from the center of the whirlwind. These beings are described as alive and having the likeness of a man, most likely signifying their basic shape was humanoid in appearance, at least from Ezekiel's three-dimensional perspective. Now, that said, these beings do seem to be bodily connected together in some way as one living construct, for lack of a better term. And we'll see this in later verses. But for now, and that does have to do with that, extra-dimensional unfolding thing. But I'll get into that in a little bit. But as we'll see in later verses, this aspect. But notice here, specifically, the text say, they, so that's plural, they had the likeness of a man, singular. So these four are somehow connected as one, and the description is going to tell us how that is. Ezekiel 1:6 says, "And every one had four faces, and every one had four wings." Now, there have been many artistic attempts to express what this might look like, and the main thing to recognize is that the text says every one had, meaning this is a description of each of the four beings. It does not depict the connected group as a whole. This means that if we were to consider the appearance of only one of the beings disconnected from the other three, it would have four faces and four wings. If every one of the four beings had four faces, the entire living construct would have 16 faces in total, four faces for each of the four beings. 4 times 4 equals 16. Now, that, of course, conflicts a little bit with some traditional depictions that we find online and stuff, but given the language of the text, I believe this is a reasonable assumption. So let's look at Ezekiel 1:7, which says, "And their feet were straight feet, and the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. And again, it's Ezekiel 1:7. So this shows one way these living beings are connected. Now, notice that the text uses the plural word feet, plural, yet the singular word soul. The soul singular of their feet, plural, was like the sole of a calf's foot, singular. Now, interestingly, the Hebrew word used here for feet is kaf and can include the leg. So this seems to be conveying the idea that the tops of the being's legs start out as separate, but as they extend down, at some point they meld or converge into one until by the time we get to the very bottom, they all share one single sole of the foot. Ezekiel 1:8 says, "And they had the hands of a man under their wings on their four sides, and they four had their faces and their wings." Now, this is pretty straightforward. Ezekiel is saying that under the wings, the beings have hands like those of a man. The text states they, plural, had the hands, plural, of a man, singular. So a single man possesses two hands. The text seems to imply that each being has two hands, one under each wing. This is found on all four sides, bringing the total number of hands to 8. Ezekiel then reaffirms what he already explained by reminding us that each of the four have multiple faces and wings. Now, next, Ezekiel gives a profound description of one of the most interesting aspects of this whole vision. Ezekiel 1:9 says, "Their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went, and they went every one straight forward." So this is telling us that each wing is connected to the one next to it. The common depiction shows these wings connected only at the tips, but Ezekiel's words don't seem to convey that idea. The Hebrew word for joined here is chavar, meaning unite, join, bind together, be joined, and be coupled, among other terms describing the same idea. It seems the wings are not merely joined at the tips, but are rather joined in full. The language seems to imply that every part of each wing is united, melded, or fused with the wing next to it. And it seems that the same type of fusing together described with the legs is what we see with the wings. Now, this is further supported by Ezekiel saying, "They turned not when they went every one straight forward." So since they are fused at the feet and the wings, and since each has four faces, whatever direction this living structure decides to move, it would be considered as straightforward from the perspective of the beings. And so keep this fusing thing in mind. Now, one phenomenal idea to consider is the idea of the tesseract that we've discussed in other areas, like the videos I mentioned before, and also my books, Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, that are available at prophecywatchers.com, and those are available together as a set. If we can try to imagine what this fusion of beings would look like, we notice it has the same basic structure as a tesseract. And just for a quick review, a tesseract is an unfolded hypercube. A hypercube is a cube of four dimensions of space rather than 3. So a good way to help try to understand this is, imagine you have a 3-dimensional cube and you put it on a 2-dimensional surface. Now let's say you wanted as much of that cube on that 2-dimensional surface as possible. How would you do it? Well, you could unfold the panels. A cube is made up of 6 panels. When it's all unfolded, it looks like a cross. You got 4 going up and down, and then 2 coming out the side. So it looks like a cross or a lowercase t. You just imagine unfolding that cube. Imagine the cube's hollow inside, but you unfold the cube and lay it flat out onto a 2-dimensional surface. That's how you can unfold a higher dimensional shape into a lower dimensional area. So the idea with the tesseract is, well, how could we as 3-dimensional beings understand a cube that has a 4th spatial dimension? Well, we can't. We can't visualize it. So you would have to unfold that hypercube into 3 dimensions, and that's the closest that we would be able to get. to understanding it. We would have the most amount of information possible in our three-dimensional space. And what that would look like, that shape that after it's unfolded, is called a hypercube, and it looks like it's a three-dimensional cross made of three-dimensional cubes with two extra arms coming out the side, because you have in the fourth dimension that's added an extra dimension. So so again, you would have your four cubes stacked on top of each other. Then you would have two coming out this side, two coming out this side. And that's the closest that we can understand to what a hypercube would look like. Now that's what it looks like unfolded, but that's what is called extra-dimensional unfolding. And it's a way for physicists to try to understand extra-dimensional objects that we can't think about, we can't see in our head, we can't visualize them. So that's the basic idea behind a tesseract. Now, what's really strange is if we can try to imagine what this fusion of these beings, of these angels, would look like, we notice that they actually have the same basic structure as a tesseract. Now, I searched long and wide across the internet for an adequate image to illustrate this, but alas, I could find nothing representing this in all important aspects. So we have to kind of just use our imaginations here. I did find a couple of images coming somewhat close, at least to the point that they could help us kind of visualize the similar shape of the tesseract in regards to these fused beings. And I do include those in my books if you want to look at those and get a more lengthy description of those. But they're internet images, so it's not exact. Now, to understand this further, we need to remember again what a tesseract actually is. It's the three-dimensional unfolding of a hypercube. Again, a hypercube is a cube consisting of 4 spatial dimensions instead of 3. Now, again, and I just want to go through it again to make sure we get it in our head, because I know that this is kind of hard to understand. But just imagine unfolding that 4-dimensional hypercube into a 3-dimensional tesseract. Now that you have the 3-dimensional tesseract, so you got the cross with the 2 extra arms made of cubes. Now imagine unfolding that shape again, the same 3-dimensional tesseract, into a flat 2-dimensional representation. Now, that's kind of even more difficult to imagine, but doing that would involve a lot of these squares, these panels, taking up the same space as other panels, because it's too complex of an image. And you're gonna have some of these squares overlapping the same 2-dimensional space as other squares. It would involve a lot of fusing and melding of the squares, as they would have to take up the same space. This is why I believe Ezekiel saw something that originates even higher, from an even higher dimension than the fourth spatial. So I believe that these angels, these cherubim that Ezekiel saw, have to be at least from a 5th spatial dimension, because you need at least 2 extra dimensions to get this melding and fusing effect. Again, I know it's really hard to imagine. You can unfold a cube into 2 dimensions and nothing's going to overlap. But if you try to do that with a tesseract, you have a lot more panels to work with, a lot more unfolding that needs to happen, and a lot of those panels are going to have to take up the same space as other panels, which, from a 2-dimensional perspective, if you were a 2-dimensional being, it would look like these panels were fused together. It would look like these squares were taking up the same space, were joined together or fused together. So this could be why, from Ezekiel's 3-dimensional perspective, that he saw a strange fusing and melding of these beings. What Ezekiel saw seems to be the result of a literal unfolding of higher dimensional beings into 3 spatial dimensions, so Ezekiel could actually see them. Because if they remained in their 5th dimensional state, Ezekiel wouldn't be able to see them. Not completely. If a hypercube were not unfolded and it just breached our space, we would only see a cube. There would be more to it, but we wouldn't be able to see any of it. We would only be able to see just the one cube that happened to be breaching our space of the many that it's made out of. Just like if you have a cube, a regular three-dimensional cube, and you place it on a two-dimensional space, like a plane, like a piece of paper or something, if you're a two-dimensional being living on that piece of paper, you're not going to be able to see the cube because you don't have up or down. You're only going to be able to see a square. Now, you're not going to be able to see a square from top down. You would see really just a line in front of you, and you would have to travel around to perceive the fact that it's a square. Just like when we look at a cube, we can't see all sides of the cube at once. We got to turn it around to see all different sides of it. But they would only have access to one two-dimensional slice of that cube. So, if this is what's going on, for Ezekiel to be able to see the most amount of information, the most amount of these angels, there would have to be some type of unfolding effect happening, and that could be why Ezekiel is seeing these parts, the legs and the wings, melding together, because they're literally being unfolded into the same space. And that would also give Ezekiel the most amount of information visually about these creatures. And keep in mind, Ezekiel wrote this 2,600 years ago. He didn't have any concept of extra-dimensional unfolding. Nobody did until pretty recently. So to think about that is truly amazing. I mean, we have an eyewitness account of somebody who could not have had any knowledge of quantum physics or higher dimensions or anything like that, yet he described something that was only just recently talked about in our modern time in the field of quantum physics. That to me is mind-blowing. He truly saw something extra-dimensional. He truly saw something real. He wouldn't have known to make that up. Yet you have atheists say that the Bible was just written by a bunch of ignorant goat farmers. I don't think so. Okay. So next, let's talk about the faces of these living beings, of these cherubim. Ezekiel 1:10 says, "As for the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox on the left side. They four had the face of an eagle." Now, when we look deeply into that text, we see that this is quite different than what's usually depicted in illustrations. In most artistic expressions, these four faces are shown to be on a separate side. One on the left, one on the right, one in back, one in front. But notice what the text actually says. First, they four had. Again, meaning that this is one common description as each of the four beings. Each of them has four faces for a total of 16. So next, they four had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side. Now that signifies that the face of the lion and the face of the man are both on the right side. That's one way to read that. So I believe that it's entirely possible that these two faces are two halves split in the middle vertically, thus creating a bisection of the head with the half face of a lion on the left side and the half face of a man on the right side, and all of those would be on the right side of the of the head. So, as the late author and researcher David Flynn pointed out, this is seen later in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 41:18 through 19 says, "And it was made with cherubims and palm trees, so that a palm tree was between a cherub, and every cherub had two faces, so that the face of a man was toward the palm tree on one side, and the face of a young lion toward the palm tree on the other side. It was made through all the house round about." Now, this is quite similar, believe it or not, to the description of the face on Mars. If you know that artifact, that weird thing that was photographed years ago on Mars, that face. Well, authors and researchers such as Mike Barra, Richard Hoagland, and David Flynn have done extensive work interpreting the meaning of the face, and one theory states that the structure portrays two faces, one of a man and one of a lion, bisected down the middle vertically and fused together. And for more information on that, I highly recommend the book Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars by David E. Flynn. I actually have a copy right back there of mine. I've got a couple copies, actually. It's an excellent book, and he goes into great detail about that. Now, so keep that in mind. It's a fate, and this is what I was talking about in that Revelation video. Because for everything for everything God has, Satan has an evil inverse. He has an inferior duplicate. When we look at the fallen angels, the fallen watchers or cherubim or whatever we call them, the locusts that come out of the pit in Revelation 9, it says that they have hair of a woman, but they have teeth of a lion. So we see the same bisection of human and lion face, but instead of vertical, it's horizontal. You get the human side on the top half and the lion part on the bottom half. And I think that signifies that these are the bad guys. These are the inverse of the good guys that Ezekiel saw, of God's holy angels. And that's why that bisection is still there, because that seems to be part of this species and how the species of angel works. But because they're fallen, because they're an inverse, they're bisected horizontally rather than vertically. So I think that's just really interesting. Now, so next, Ezekiel says, they four had the face of an ox on the left side. So that's showing that the face of the ox is the only face on the left side. So again, on the right side, you have half lion, half man, bisected vertically. And on the left side, you have the face of the ox. And then last, it says they four also had the face of an eagle. So the eagle is not given a side at all. So for the eagle to neither be on the right or the left, it must be in the middle, probably right in front. So the bisected faces of the lion and man are on the right, the face of the ox is on the left side, and the face of the eagle is in the middle. Now, again, this may fall a bit outside of traditional depictions of the four living beings, but given the scriptural evidence, it's my humble opinion that this is at least a fair assumption. Now, in researching for my book, Quantum Creation, I often wondered if the faces of these creatures could somehow be symbolizing dimensions of space. I was presented with evidence showing the ox could represent the first dimension, what would be the x-axis. So an ox is generally referred to as a domesticated animal in the Bible. When an ox is used to plow a field today, for example, it generally must walk in the one direction that it's allowed. Back and forth. Now, also, as Mark Flynn points out in Forbidden Secrets of the Labyrinth, which is another excellent book you should check out, and his blog on the Ox Circuit, which I don't know if the blog's still active, but it's at least in his book. But he wrote this, quote, "The threshing floor in ancient times was a flat, circular area of smooth rock where an ox or a team of oxen would loosen wheat grain from the hard outer chaff. This method is still used today in places where modern machinery is not available." Now, from the perspective of the ox, it would be walking in one direction continuously. The eternal never-ending line that creates the circle could represent the first dimension. Now, I know a circle is a two-dimensional shape, but think of the perspective of the ox. He's always going forward, always. Now, the lion could represent the second dimension. Since lions are wild in nature and not referred to as domesticated, a lion would have free reign to roam in two dimensions, the X and the Y axes. X, Y, or actually X, Y, but you have the two axes. A lion can roam along the ground anywhere that it chooses. Now, the eagle, having the ability of flight, would be free to travel through the air. And thus all three spatial dimensions, the X, the Y, and the Z axes. Now, man, having a living soul and thus a spiritual component, could be a representation of the fourth spatial dimension, which I believe very well could be synonymous with the spirit world, at least a section of it, a part of it. The part of our spirit world that coincides and sometimes bleeds into our own. And again, I talk about that more in the book. Now, the main problem I had was between the lion and the man. So my concern was that the lion might actually represent the fourth spatial dimension. And I considered this because the lion is used in reference to Jesus Christ. And a good example of this is found in Revelation 5:5, where Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. This takes place in heaven outside the three spatial dimensions of our physical reality. Also, Satan is referred to as a roaring lion seeking whom he can devour. And that's 1 Peter 5:8. Again, for everything God has, Satan has an inferior duplicate. Now, as I've talked about earlier, when the rebellious angels fell, I think, and I talked about that in one of those videos, but when the rebellious angels fell, they may have fallen to the fourth spatial dimension. We also saw several reasons why I believe that Jesus Christ had access to the fourth spatial dimension after his after his resurrection. That's the word. Jesus was never created. After his resurrection, and again, I talk about that in my book, Quantum Creation. I think that's why I had creation on the mind. Now, for these reasons, I wondered if perhaps the face of the lion was referencing the fourth spatial dimension and the face of the man was representing the second spatial dimension, because man has free reign to walk in any direction on the face of the earth, but lacks the natural ability of flight. But when I looked closer at Ezekiel's description, I realized that the face of the lion and the face of the man are most likely interchangeable. Both are bisected and located on the right side. And this might show that both could have the ability to represent either the second or the fourth spatial dimension. And that was kind of the additional evidence I needed to be comfortable in writing about the possibility of the four faces representing spatial dimensions, which brought me to dimensional cycles. So something also really interesting is a connection to Hebrew word pictures, which is another topic Mark Flynn talks about in Forbidden Secrets of the Labyrinth, and how the Aleph, the first letter of the ancient Hebrew alphabet, looked like an ox. Since the ox represents the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, it could be more evidence to show that the ox also represents the first spatial dimension in Ezekiel's vision. On further research, I discovered something possibly providing an answer to the location of the other dimensions within Scripture. So in Quantum Creation and Cherubim Chariots, I explored the possibility of 12 dimensions making up the total construct of God's creation. Everything except God himself. So these dimensions would be 10 of space, or spatial dimensions, 1 of time, or temporal, and 1 zeroth, or foundational dimension. Now, just as a brief review of that idea, not every theoretical physicist adheres to the idea of a zeroth dimension, but the basic idea is if the first dimension is described as a line between 2 points, and that's what it is, it's just a line, the zeroth dimension, and remember too, a line really is just a series of points. That's what a line is. Well, the zeroth dimension would be the place a single point would reside. So to those who subscribe to the idea, it's seen as a foundation for all other dimensions. And if that's true, then that would bring us up to 12 total dimensions. And, that kind of makes sense with if you're into biblical numbers and things. 12 is about like order and government and, divine government, stuff like that. So to explain the cycle possibility, the idea that maybe these are cycles, envision the 4 living creatures connected in the following way. So imagine the starting point is the ox. That's the first dimension. Then imagine a line going from the ox to the man. And, the lion and the man may be interchangeable, but just for sake of this thought exercise, we'll just say that the man represents this second spatial dimension. So from the ox to the man, next see the line extending from the man to the eagle, then from the eagle to the lion. So now we kind of have a dilemma. If the lion connects back to the ox, then we're going back to the first spatial dimension. But What if the ox can change into something that represents the fifth spatial dimension? So consider a passage in Ezekiel later, in which Ezekiel later describes the four living creatures again. So Ezekiel 10:14 says, "And everyone had four faces. The first face was the face of a cherub. The second face was the face of a man. The third, the face of a lion. And the fourth, the face of an eagle." So we can see that the face of the ox has been replaced by the face of a cherub. So even more, the angels, that Ezekiel saw, as we discussed earlier, were most likely of the fifth spatial dimension, or possibly higher, but at least the fifth, rather than the fourth, due to that melding, fusing effect, signifying a type of double unfolding between two lower dimensions. So as we can see, the cycle continues, this time with the line connecting to the cherub, fifth dimension, then to the man, sixth dimension, and interestingly enough, the number 6 is the biblical number of man, to the lion, seventh dimension, having all sorts of implications, with Jesus as the lion, and the book of Revelation being full of sevens, then to the eagle, the eighth dimension. But is this where it ends? Well, these beings show up again in the book of Revelation. These are the 3 times these beings show up. Revelation 4:7, "And the first beast was like a lion, the second beast was like a calf, and the third beast had the face as a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle." So since this scene is set in heaven, outside of John's usual 3 dimensions of space, the cycles continue again, and this time the line goes even higher. The line from the second mention of the eagle, 8th dimension, would connect to the lion, 9th dimension, to the calf, or what could be considered as a repeat of the ox, 10th dimension, to the man, 11th dimension, and then finally to the eagle, the 12th dimension. So it's interesting to note that this line cycles around 3 times in total, and we get each cycle in each description that we find in the Bible. We get 2 in Ezekiel and 1 in Revelation. Why 3? Well, that it could be a representation of God as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. It could be a one for each member of the Trinity. It could be something like that. The other way to visualize this whole cycle idea is as an upward spiral. The spiral itself would consist of 3 revolutions. And keep in mind, this is only a thought exercise. In reality, the spiral would not be moving up as in regards to the z-axis in a 3-dimensional space. Just as the first, second, and third dimension exist within the same spatial reality, I believe the same would be true for the rest of the dimensions. The only difference is we can't actually see them. But as long as we keep in mind that we're not talking about a literal spatial movement in the upward direction as defined by the z-axis, we can kind of think of this as an upward spiral as a way to at least understand the concept of this cycle of dimensions. Now, one last thing I'll note for this section, then we got a lot more to talk about. But the last thing I'll note here is the difference in the descriptions of the 4 beasts of Revelation and the 4 beings of Ezekiel. Each time Ezekiel describes the beings, he notices that they are fused or melded together. And we recognize this as an unfolding of a higher dimensional being into a lower spatial dimension, as Ezekiel was seeing this from his 3 spatial dimensional environment. John, though, was able to see these beings, referred to as beasts in Revelation, in their higher spatial dimensional environment, the throne room in heaven. John wasn't even sure if he was inside or outside of the body while all this was going on. It's unclear whether he was still subject to his own 3 spatial dimensional visual perception, but regardless, he still had to describe what he was witnessing in a higher spatial dimension to the rest of us who are limited to perceiving 3 dimensions of space. So, that being the case, John was able to get a clearer view of the true appearance of these beings in their own natural habitat. This is why the cherubim were separate and not fused or melded together in the way Ezekiel saw them. Ezekiel saw them in a 3-dimensional environment. They had to be unfolded. John went up to the throne room in heaven, potentially an extra-dimensional environment. So John was not seeing the mere unfolding of these beings. He was seeing these beings as they really are, at least to the extent that his perception at the time allowed. Now, I know that was a lot to take in. I suggest watching the video a couple more times. Download that PDF from dailyrenegade.com. You got to be a member to do that, but download the PDF. If you got the books, read through the books, because I have some pictures and stuff in there that might help. But just, I really want to encourage you. This stuff, while it sounds kind of complicated, the more you think about it, the easier it'll be to understand. You're never going to be able to visualize a higher dimension. So anybody that claims that they can is lying. You're never going to be able to do that. But to at least understand the concepts, it took me a while too. I had to really think about this stuff. I had to really go over the material, give it a lot of thought. But at some point, something just clicks, and you're able to kind of start thinking in this way a little easier. And it's really just, it's nothing special. It's really just, we have to undo a lot of the stuff that we learned about in like high school science and even some college basic science classes and stuff like that. That's really what it has a lot to do with. So these ideas are not unattainable to you. It just might take some thought. Also, Chuck Missler has a lot of great stuff about flat land and extra dimensions, and he was who I first got interested in regards to that. So I would suggest that. Now, as I stated, we have a lot more to talk about. I want to talk about these guardian beings from hyperspace, and I want to talk about not only the locusts, but there are other beings where they seem to be inverted versions of these cherubim, of the good guys. There's inverted versions that we find throughout the world, like the Lamassu and Shadu. I want to talk a little bit about the Garden of Eden. I want to talk about the Ark of the Covenant and some other really cool things that connect with all this. But in order to get all that information, head on over to dailyrenegade.com right now. It is linked in the description below. dailyrenegade.com right now, and get a membership. A membership is only $10 a month or $100 a year. If you can do it, I suggest getting the $100 a year because it is cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months for free, and your membership helps the continuation of Daily Renegade. It helps it helps just the ministry effort as a whole. And we're also trying to save up some money to get apps going so you can access Daily Renegade on your phone and on your TV. We're hoping to have that very, very soon. So all of your donations go to that. Or donations, well, your membership fees and donations if you care to donate. Speaking of donations, I should mention real quickly, we're at the time of this recording, we're still in the process of selling our house in Illinois and paying rent here in Oklahoma City, because I recently accepted a job at Prophecy Watchers, and it's been great so far. But having these two places, we're a single income family, and we have 5 kids, so it's pretty expensive. Also, we just found out a storm blew through our area of Illinois and messed up our house some, so we have to pay to get that fixed before we can sell it. And there's other costs and things like that too. So we're still accepting donations for that. All the information is in the description below, but the easiest way is paypal.me/JoshPeck disclosure. I also have a Cash App, which is $JoshScottPeck. And all of that, again, is in the description below. There's also, if you also want to do a super thanks here on YouTube, you can do that. I do believe YouTube takes a cut, but I don't know how much. I'm not sure, but that will get rolled into our AdSense stuff, so you can do that as well. And also, we're also accepting donations for the continued health of our son Nathan, who is in remission from cancer. But the treatment destroyed a lot of his immune system, and we're building that back up the all natural way. And so we got all that covered, but none of it's covered by insurance. So when I say we have it covered, I mean we have a plan in place for him, but none of it's covered by insurance. It's extremely expensive, and if we don't do it, then we run the risk of the cancer possibly coming back. So again, all that donation information is in the description below. The best way, if you have PayPal, or if you want, it's paypal.me/JoshPeck disclosure. I do not have a P.O. box set up yet to receive checks, but as soon as I do, I will have it on the homepage at dailyrenegade.com. If you go to the bottom of the homepage, so this is before you log in, You'll see the donation information there. As soon as I have a PO box, I'll add that there. Also, check out some of the other links that we have in the description. I think you're going to find some good stuff, like Cornerstone Asset Metals. I think it's a really good idea with the way that the economy is going and how there are people just bent on destroying the American dollar, and that seems to be happening. To invest in some gold and silver, especially silver. I think that's the best way. But you got to be careful who you go through because there's so many scammers. There's a lot of people that'll give you, they'll even call themselves Christian, but they'll give you a higher price. Well, Cornerstone Asset Metals is not like that. They treat this as a ministry effort. And I've had the owner on, a financial expert, Terry Saka, lots of times. So if you want more information about it, and he's one of us, he's into prophecy and Nephilim and all the stuff that we talk about. He's a great guy. He treats this as a ministry effort. He's not in it to make money. He feels called by God to do it, and he takes it very seriously. So if you want some free information, just want to. They're not salesmen, they're not going to be pushy with you. You can talk Nephilim with them if you want, but it's just cornerstoneassetmetals.com, and the link is in the description below. Check out the interviews that I've done with Terry Saka for more information on that. Okay, so all that, and we got lots of other stuff down there too that you should check out. So all of that being said, I think we're going to call it for the free version here. So once again, if you are viewing on dailyrenegade.com, you don't have to do anything. Just keep watching, and we're going to get back to the information pretty much now. For everybody viewing for free on YouTube, Rumble, and possibly elsewhere, thank you so much. And until next time, take care and God bless.